"Get your hands off that brush." Those were the first words Aldous Beaumont heard when he walked into the Hargrove Gallery on a Tuesday evening in October. Not a question, not a warning, a command. The kind of voice that had spent decades assuming it would be obeyed. Aldous Beaumont had a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. He was wearing gray coveralls with the building management logo stitched on the chest pocket, and he had just finished cleaning the marble floors of the east corridor when he saw it. The canvas. Nobody had covered it. The piece was leaning against the prep room wall, unframed, raw, maybe 4 feet by 5, oil on linen, and Aldous Beaumont, who had been mopping floors in this building for 3 years, recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on an envelope. He had simply reached out, one finger, not even touching, hovering an inch from the surface, tracing the curve of a brushstroke without contact. That was when Elliot Hargrove walked in. Elliot Hargrove did not introduce himself in rooms. He arrived in them. There was a difference, and everyone in the art world knew it. At 61, Hargrove ran the most important private gallery in Atlanta. His name appeared in catalogs the way God's name appears in churches, everywhere unquestioned, assumed. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Aldous made in 6 months and carried a glass of Bordeaux that he hadn't actually touched since the reception began. He looked at Aldous Beaumont the way certain men look at a pigeon that has wandered into a dining room. I said, "Get your hands away from that canvas." Hargrove set his wine down on a nearby table, deliberately, like a judge placing down a gavel. "Do you have any idea what that piece is worth? Do you have any idea what the oils on your skin can do to a surface like that?" Aldous Beaumont lowered his hand slowly. He did not step back. He did not apologize. He simply turned to look at Elliot Hargrove with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Not defiant, not afraid, not ashamed, just still. That stillness seemed to irritate Hargrove more than anything else could have. Who let maintenance in here during the reception? Hargrove turned to the room. There were maybe 40 people in the adjacent gallery space. Collectors, critics, 2 curators from the High Museum, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His assistant, a young woman named Petra, who wore a headset even at cocktail parties, materialized at his elbow. Petra, why is a janitor standing next to the Voss piece? And then, here is the part nobody in that room forgot. Elliot Hargrove walked forward and put his palm flat on Aldous Beaumont's chest. Not a shove, not quite, but a push, the kind that says you do not belong in this space without using any words at all. Aldous Beaumont's bucket tipped, water sloshed across the freshly cleaned marble, and the mop handle cracked against the leg of the table where Hargrove had set his wine. The glass fell. The Bordeaux went across Hargrove's sleeve. The room went very quiet. Let's go back, because Elliot Hargrove had no idea, and this is the thing that makes the whole story worth telling. He had absolutely no idea who he had just put his hand on. Aldous Beaumont was born in Savannah, Georgia, in 1961. He was the third of 5 children. His mother worked as a school librarian. His father drove a delivery truck for 30 years. The house they grew up in was small and warm and full of books, and on the living room wall there was a reproduction of a Romary Bearden collage that Aldous stared at every morning while he ate breakfast. He was 7 years old when he understood that he wanted to make things like that. Not like that exactly. Different, but from the same place. By the time Aldous was 16, he was painting murals on the walls of the community center on West Broad Street. By 19, he had a scholarship to the Savannah College of Art and Design. By 24, he had a studio in Brooklyn, a group show in a Soho gallery, and a piece that an art critic from the Village Voice described as startling in its clarity. A young painter who already knows exactly what he is trying to say. That was 1985. What followed the next decade and a half was the kind of career that people in the art world talk about in hushed, slightly reverent tones. Aldous Beaumont showed work in New York, Chicago, London. He had a solo exhibition at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1992 that sold out in 2 days. He was reviewed in Art News. A museum in Copenhagen acquired one of his large-scale pieces for its permanent collection. A collector in Dubai purchased 3 paintings for what his gallery called a significant private sum. His work was studied in 2 doctoral dissertations. A professor at Yale included him in a survey course on late 20th century American painting. And then in 2003, Aldous Beaumont disappeared. Not literally. He didn't die. He didn't vanish. He just stopped showing, stopped responding to the galleries that called. stopped attending openings, stopped traveling to art fairs, stopped returning emails from curators who wanted to include him in group exhibitions. The art world is patient about some things and ruthless about others. When Aldous Beaumont went quiet, the art world moved on. Other names rose. New conversations started, the way it always does. What nobody outside his immediate family knew was this. In the fall of 2002, Aldous Beaumont's daughter, Imani, was diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. She was 6 years old. The treatment was experimental, partially covered, brutally expensive. Aldous had a studio, a reputation, and very little actual money, because that is the truth about most artists, even successful ones, that the world prefers not to acknowledge. He sold the studio. He sold the paintings he had kept, the ones he'd intended to keep forever, the ones that were too personal to sell. He sold everything. And then he needed a job, a steady job, a job that paid every 2 weeks without asking whether the market was moving or whether critics were paying attention. He found one. For 11 years, Aldous Beaumont worked in building management. He learned HVAC systems. He became certified in commercial cleaning and facilities maintenance. He was reliable, professional, and quiet. His supervisors liked him. His coworkers found him steady. Nobody asked about his past, because people in maintenance work don't often ask about each other's pasts, and Aldous Beaumont never offered. Imani recovered. It took 4 years, 3 surgeries, and more than Aldous ever calculated, because he had decided not to calculate it. She was studying pre-med at Spelman College now. She called her father every Sunday. Aldous Beaumont did not regret a single thing he had sold, but he missed painting the way you miss a language you grew up speaking. The need didn't go away. It just lived somewhere quieter. And sometimes, when he was alone in a building after hours, moving through spaces filled with beautiful things, that need would surface, and he would just stand there, close to the work, not touching, just looking, the way a man who used to swim will sometimes stand at the edge of water. That was what Elliot Hargrove had interrupted. The piece Aldous had been hovering near, the one Hargrove called the Voss piece, was, in fact, being considered for acquisition by the Hargrove Gallery. It was a large abstract, aggressive in its palette, technically interesting. The artist was German, young, recently featured in a prominent Berlin exhibition. Hargrove was paying considerable money to bring the piece to Atlanta and had plans to sell it to a collector in Buckhead for 3 times what he was paying. It was a fine painting. It was not, in Aldous Beaumont's private assessment, a great one. He had not said this. He had not said anything. He had simply noticed something in the upper left quadrant of the canvas, a decision the painter had made about layering that was, in his opinion, slightly off. Not wrong, just not as resolved as the rest of the piece. The kind of thing you only see if you've spent years making those decisions yourself. He had reached out involuntarily, the same way a former athlete's body will sometimes move toward a ball without being told to. That was all. Hargrove did not know any of this. Hargrove saw a black man in coveralls standing too close to a $250,000 canvas, and he made a calculation in approximately 2 seconds that was not really a calculation at all. It was a reflex. An old, ugly, deeply held reflex that a certain kind of man carries and mistakes for good judgment. "You'll need to leave this space," Hargrove said, straightening his wine-stained sleeve. "Immediately. And I'll be speaking to your company Monday morning." Aldous Beaumont picked up his mop. He righted his bucket. He looked at Elliot Hargrove for a moment. Just a moment, and then he walked toward the service corridor. He did not say anything. He did not need to. But one person in that room had seen everything. Her name was Constance Mireille Oduya. She was 63 years old, recently retired, and she had spent 31 years as the chief curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem before moving back to Atlanta to be closer to her grandchildren. She was at the Hargrove Gallery reception that night because a former colleague had asked her to come, and she had come because she had nothing else to do on a Tuesday evening, and the wine was usually decent. She had watched Elliot Hargrove put his hand on that man's chest. She had also seen the man's face when he was standing near the canvas. She knew that look. She had been in rooms with artists her entire professional life. She knew what it looked like when someone was reading a painting the way a musician reads a score. Not casually, not as a civilian, but with the full technical attention of someone who had made things like it. She walked to the service corridor door. "Excuse me," she said. Aldous Beaumont stopped. He turned. Constance Oduya looked at him carefully. She was a small woman with close-cropped silver hair and the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades deciding what is worth her time. "You know that piece," she said. "It wasn't a question," Aldous considered. "I know that kind of piece," he said. "What did you see in it?" Another pause. The upper left quarter, the layering decision. He glazed over a section that needed to stay raw. It's not wrong. It's just not finished in the way he intended it to be. Constance Oduya was quiet for a moment. "What's your name?" she said. "Aldous Beaumont." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Constance Oduya had been at the Studio Museum in 1992. She had seen the exhibition. She had stood in front of at least 4 of those paintings for longer than she intended to, which was the test she always applied. Did the work hold her longer than she planned to stay? She had read the art news piece. She had used a photograph of one of his large canvases in a presentation she gave at a symposium in 2001 on the vitality of Black American painting. She stared at him. "Aldous Beaumont," she said again slowly. "You stopped around 2003. He said nothing. "What happened?" He thought about how to answer that, and then he said, "My daughter needed me." Constance Oduya nodded once. The way someone nods when they've received information that requires no further questions. "Are you still painting?" she said. The honest answer was complicated. He had a small apartment in Decatur. He had a corner in the bedroom with a folding table and a set of oil paints he'd bought at an art supply store in Little 5 Points 8 months ago. He had started 2 pieces. Both were covered with a sheet. He hadn't looked at them in 6 weeks. "Slowly," he said. Constance Oduya reached into her bag and produced a business card. She held it out. "I'm organizing a group exhibition," she said. "Private gallery here in Atlanta, opening in March. I've been looking for a 5th painter. I think I've been waiting to find the right person." Aldous looked at the card. "Dr. Oduya," he said. "I'm a maintenance worker." "I know what you are," she said. "I'm asking what you were, and whether you're willing to be it again." Elliot Hargrove had made some calls on Monday. The building management company's contract with the Hargrove Gallery was reviewed. There was some pressure, the kind of institutional pressure that certain men apply when they feel that their authority has been affronted and need to reassert it in small and petty ways. Aldous Beaumont was reassigned. Not fired, the company didn't have grounds, but moved to a different building on the other side of Midtown. His supervisor apologized, told him it wasn't personal. Aldous said he understood. He meant it. He went home that night and pulled the sheet off the 2 canvases in the corner of his bedroom. He stood there looking at them for a long time. Then he sat down and went back to work. The Constance Oduya Invitational. That was what the art press eventually called it, though Constance herself referred to it simply as the show. Opened on the first Saturday of March at the Summerhill Arts Space, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that had been industrial 20 years ago and was now the kind of place where people put serious work. There were 5 painters. The other 4 were all working artists with recent exhibition histories, gallery representation, active social media presences, and careers that had followed the expected arc. They were all, in the assessment of the Atlanta arts community, worth paying attention to. Aldous Beaumont had 3 pieces in the show. He had not told his daughter about it. He had not told his co-workers. He had told his mother, who was 81 and living in Savannah, and she had said, well, it's about time and nothing else, which was the most she had ever needed to say about anything. The pieces were different from his earlier work, not unrecognizable. There were people who would have known immediately, but changed. The palette was quieter. The subjects were more interior. They were paintings made by a man who had spent 20 years doing things that had nothing to do with painting, and who had carried those years into the work without apology. One of them was a large canvas, 5 by 6 feet, depicting a corridor, marble floor, fluorescent light, a single bucket and mop in the lower right corner. In the upper half of the painting, barely visible, a figure in coveralls was reaching toward something that wasn't quite in frame. The reaching was the whole painting. What the hand was reaching for, you couldn't see. But something in the gesture made it impossible to look away. The opening night was a Friday. 200 people came. By 9 o'clock, the room was full in the way that good rooms get full, not crowded, but occupied, alive. At 8:47, a collector named Donovan Ash, who had come down from New York specifically for the show because Constance Oduya had called him personally, stood in front of the corridor painting for 22 minutes without moving. Donovan Ash had a collection worth in the region of $40 million. He had pieces by artists that auction houses talked about. He was not a man who spent 22 minutes in front of paintings that didn't earn it. He bought all 3 Beaumont pieces before the night was over. The corridor painting for a figure that made Aldous Beaumont stand very still when Constance's assistant showed him the offer on a printed sheet of paper. "Is that right?" Aldous said quietly. "That's the offer," the assistant said. Aldous looked at the number for a long moment. He thought about his daughter's medical bills, long paid but not forgotten. He thought about the studio he'd sold. He thought about 20 years of marble floors and service corridors and steady paychecks every 2 weeks. He said, "Tell him yes." The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a piece the following week. The journalist who'd been at the Hargrove Gallery reception in October, the one who'd seen Elliot Hargrove put his hand on a maintenance worker's chest, had also been at the Summerhill opening. She had not connected the 2 events immediately, but she was a good journalist, which means she paid attention to things that didn't quite fit, and something about the man at the center of that opening had stayed with her. She did some research. The piece she wrote was titled, "The Painter Who Stepped Away and Why He Came Back." It ran on a Sunday. By Monday afternoon, it had been shared more than 12,000 times. By Tuesday, it was picked up by 3 national outlets. By Wednesday, the Studio Museum in Harlem had put out a statement expressing their admiration for Aldous Beaumont's work and their intention to explore future programming that honored his contribution to American painting. Elliot Hargrove was quoted in the piece. One sentence, near the end, after the journalist had called his gallery for comment. The quote read, "The Hargrove Gallery has always been committed to supporting artists of all backgrounds. Nobody in the art world missed the irony. Nobody said anything about it publicly. They didn't need to." The journalist, to her credit, had included one other detail in the piece. A source who had been present at the October reception, unnamed, described only as a longtime figure in the Atlanta arts community, confirmed that Elliot Hargrove had physically removed Aldous Beaumont from the vicinity of a painting and had threatened his employment. Hargrove did not issue a follow-up statement. Imani Beaumont called her father the Sunday after the piece ran. She called at her usual time, 11 in the morning between church and lunch, and when Aldous picked up, she was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from her usual quiet. "Dad," she said. "Hey, baby, I read the article." He waited. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't steadiness. Aldous sat down in the chair by the window in his apartment. The 2 new canvases he'd started since the show were leaning against the wall across from him. He hadn't covered them with the sheet. "I didn't know how it would go," he said honestly. "You sold 3 pieces, Dad." "I know. The article says the corridor painting was." She stopped. He could hear her composing herself. "It describes it and I know what's in it. The mop, the bucket, the figure reaching, Imani. I want to see it." "Is it still?" "He bought it," Aldous said. "The collector from New York." A long pause. "That's good," she said. Her voice was doing something complicated. "That's really good." "It is. Are you? Dad, are you painting again? For real?" He looked at the 2 uncovered canvases across the room. One of them was still mostly blank. The other was maybe a third of the way there. He'd been working on it at night, after dinner, 2 or 3 hours at a time, the way you pick up something you set down a long time ago and discover your hands still know what to do. "Yeah," he said. "For real." She was quiet again. "I know you did what you did because of me," she said finally. "I know you sold everything. I know you took that job and you never." She stopped again. "You never made it feel like a sacrifice." Aldous looked out the window. The light in Decatur on Sunday mornings had a particular quality he had been thinking about for months. The way it came in at that angle and hit the sidewalk and turned ordinary concrete into something almost luminous. He'd been trying to figure out how to paint it. "It wasn't a sacrifice," he said. "It was a choice. There's a difference." Imani Beaumont let out a long breath. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, baby." After they hung up, Aldous sat in the chair for a while without moving. Then he got up, picked up a brush, and went back to the canvas. There is something people say about talent, that it cannot be hidden, that it always finds its way to the surface, that the world eventually recognizes what is real. This is a comfortable thing to believe. It makes the story feel inevitable, faded, clean. But Aldous Beaumont had been in a building in Midtown Atlanta for 3 years. moving through marble corridors and supply rooms and service elevators, and not a single person in that building had looked at him and seen a painter whose work hung in a museum in Copenhagen. Not one. What they saw was a maintenance worker, and so that is what he was, to them. The world does not find talent. The world is usually looking somewhere else entirely. What happened to Aldous Beaumont happened because he reached toward a canvas, and someone happened to be watching who knew what that gesture meant. If Constance Oduya had been standing 2 rooms over, if she had been tired that evening and left early, if Elliot Hargrove had not made a scene, and this is the part that has a certain justice to it, if Hargrove had simply ignored the man in the coveralls the way he usually ignored the men in coveralls, Constance Oduya might never have looked twice. It was Hargrove's contempt that put Aldous Beaumont in her line of sight. Some people make enemies of their own cruelty. Elliot Hargrove was one of them. He handed a woman who knew exactly what she was looking at a reason to look. Donovan Ash, the collector from New York, eventually loaned the corridor painting to a group exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. It hung in the 3rd room of the show between a piece by a well-known artist from Lagos and a large photograph by a celebrated documentary photographer from Chicago. The wall card read Aldous Beaumont, B. 1961, Savannah, Georgia. Corridor 2024, oil on linen, 60 x 72 in, collection of Donovan Ash. A critic writing about the exhibition in a major arts publication devoted 3 paragraphs specifically to the Beaumont piece. The paragraphs described the light in the corridor, the quality of the reaching, the bucket and mop in the lower right corner that somehow managed to be both exactly what they were and completely something else at the same time. The critic wrote that it was the kind of painting that made you aware, without being told, of everything the painter had lived through in order to make it. Aldous Beaumont read the review on his phone during a break at his maintenance job. He was still working. He had kept the job. He was not sure yet whether that would change, or how, or when. But the work had never embarrassed him, and it didn't now. He finished reading, put his phone in his pocket, and picked up his mop. He had a corridor to clean. And for the first time in a long time, when he walked into it, he was already thinking about how he would paint the light.